Well, this is again Educational Change Sauna in Harvard Graduate School of Education. This evening we have special guests from Boston College, across the river. Andy Hargreaves, a good colleague and friend of mine, Blair, and his grad student, and I have Jonathan here from our class here. I guess everybody knows Andy. You're a father of educational change, done a long career as an author and authority and researcher in this field. I would like to start this sauna conversation by asking you kind of a personal observation from your long career in educational change, that there must be moments when you realize that people claim that something works in education or educational change or educational reform, but it actually doesn't. It's not true. In this class, tonight we're looking at the fallacies of educational change, things that were not true. What did you collect during the journey in educational change with you that you would identify as a fallacy?
Well, Pasi, first of all, thank you for the invitation for Blair and I to join this discussion and to join your class later this evening. As you know, originally I come from England and began my research career in England and then moved to Canada and then moved to the United States. And if you're asking for one quick, clear and clean fallacy that emerged very quickly, it would be that in 1988 England introduced the Educational Reform Act. And with the Educational Reform Act, it introduced some of the most pervasive testing systems then known across the world. These testing systems, versions of them, were adopted by other countries, first at the state level in the United States. So having looked at them in England, we then looked at them in New York State, for example, with the Regents exams. And the belief was, with those and other reforms, that more testing would create greater achievement, higher standards, and more accountability. But the evidence, as we know from both England and the United States, if we look at most of the international indicators, is that they really perform quite badly in terms of educational achievement. In fact, most of the countries that test as heavily as the United States and England perform quite badly. Mm-hmm. So the fallacy is really that many people believe it, that more testing means more achievement.
That's right.
Some testing may be compatible with more achievement, but certainly extensive testing really doesn't seem to be.
Good. Interesting. We have students here, and you have been reading also extensively about, not only about educational change, but also about different theories of change in action. Jonathan, what do you think when you think about the myths and lies and fallacies in education?
Sure, just to respond to that. So while I agree that testing doesn't show higher student performance, I'm wondering what you think an alternative is for when federal governments do provide money, like in America right now, and the students that cash for that money, and what's an alternative way, I guess, for governments to provide funds and yet also kind of get a sense of accountability that those funds are going towards specific programs or ensuring that that money is being spent well. It seems like testing is a consequence from the fact that government needs to see where their money is going towards. So how in states and countries that have the federal government or national governments heavily invested, what's the alternative way?
Well, in the United States, there's always been strings attached to federal money. This weekend, I was in the LBJ Library in Austin, Texas, who of course introduced the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and that has very clear ways of assigning resources to particular reforms. I think many people would say, though, that since No Child Left Behind and Race to the Top in the United States, now we don't have strings attached, we have chains attached. And it's very constricting in terms of the opportunities and the professionalism that teachers have to exercise on behalf of the students they know best. So money intelligently attached to initiatives is a good idea, but whatever the leverage you use, it's important that teachers have great professional discretion to exercise the judgment and to use the training in high quality practice with the students that they know best in the communities where they work.
So, sorry. So one follow-up on that is race at top. I like how you said change attached. For me, what's brilliant about Raise to the Top is that without spending a nickel, you spurred on this change in 40+ states. And so, which I guess can empower some states. I mean, there was some changes attached that they had to do, opening charter schools and making sure there were different accountability systems. But don't you see that as a new creative way, I guess, of spurring change, spurring reform at a time when throwing money might not be the best possible way, I guess, to reform education?
It depends on how you define change. If you define change in terms of new kinds of institutions, different sorts of structures, private versus public provision, I'd say, yeah, that's a lot of change. Some people will call it churn, some people will call it turmoil. Do we see changes in the reflections in teacher quality, in student achievement, in greater equity, in the nature of instruction? I don't think there's really any clear evidence that these deep second-order changes that Barry Cuban has always talked about are taking effect at all. So you can use those big political ploys to bring about superficial structural change, but not to bring about deep changes in practice and quality.
Yeah, sort of piggybacking off of that, I would say Race to the Top is an improvement over No Child Left Behind in that it's more carrot than stick. But that said, the money is still going mostly towards accountability measures, and with a limited amount of money, if you're putting most of it towards accountability and not towards supporting teachers and students to meet those goals, then that ends up with sort of the same kind of skewed practices that happened in No Child Left Behind, where people felt tremendous pressure, but they didn't really know how to get to the standard that set.
You know, for me, whenever I hear the race to the top, it reminds me of a competition. It's a kind of a race to, you know, who can be faster and stronger than the others. And the fallacy that I have in mind related to this is that, do we have any evidence that the competition between schools for enrollment would have been successful or good method of, you know, bringing about educational change? Or could the competition as a driver of change be a kind of one of the fallacies? What do you think, Andy?
I'd be open to the possibility of fair, open, and equal competition, but I think what the evidence is here, and in many other countries, is that there's been deliberate disinvestment from public education. So there's been a willful effort to reduce public supply, which has created artificial private demand.
Right. What do you think about it? Is a competition something that we should use to drive improvements?
No, but I think it's very hard to use Valueadded in terms like Americans need to collaborate more, when I think part of the natural character of an American system is kind of really rooted on competition, of the fact that there's winners and losers. And so, and part of that difficulty also, I think, is a lot of these changes that we hope happens to these market reforms, I think will take longer to happen. If you're not going to happen overnight, Race to the Top will not lead to any new outcomes right away. It might take 5-10 years to see kind of the effects of it. But I do think competition inherently creates winners and losers, and even Race to the Top. There are people who promised to make changes and didn't get money, and in general, I think we do need to find a way for that school districts, regions, states are incentivizing more collaborative efforts. Yet I don't know how you can kind of scale that in a way in a country like America.
So I say that Race to the Top will really only work if it's a crawl to the top.
Cruel to the top?
Not a crawl. Crawl to the top. But crawl may be another argument, but I'm not going to pursue that one right now.
But, well, it's hard because with the urgency to change education, to reform education, I think sometimes you see policymakers, there's not enough time to kind of get to see the fruit that's born from these reforms.
Yeah, what do you think, Brett?
Oh, I was thinking just sort of one of the hallmarks of Race to the Top is, and one of the qualifiers for getting the money for Race to the Top is adopting a value-added modeling system, so based on sort of individual teacher contribution. So again, I feel like in a competitive system, that's another sort of competitive element that you're adding. And I would argue that elementary school, secondary school is really early to be picking winners and losers. You know, that yes, we believe in open markets, we believe in competition, but to what degree and to what extent? How early do we believe in that? You know, I mean, if you are the best teacher in your district, what does that say for the kids who aren't in your class? You know,
I mean, evaluating, you're right, it's not always about finding the best teacher. Sometimes I think it's also about ensuring that you have the quality of instruction that's happening. And so evaluation doesn't have to be about finding the winners and the losers. teachers, but I guess also about ensuring that the professionals who are teaching your kids these skills are equipped and are adding value to their education and their life outcomes, basically, also.
Okay, we have a couple of minutes time still to identify if you have any, during your studies or readings in this course or Andy's course, any other kind of interesting fallacies that you have realized that, oh boy, I thought that this is so, but it isn't. Is there any big things or small things in educational change that you would like to mention?
Yeah. I think technology right now, MOOCs, iPads, there is this infatuation that this can solve everything. Right. When, on the contrary, I think we don't see the data yet that it's improving. Khan Academy, these MOOCs, who's using them? Are there people with middle skills who want to be smarter, who already are not low-performing students? This idea, I'm from California, this idea that classrooms equipped with iPads will solve everything, I think is very attractive, but also is not really proven yet. So I think the idea that technology can save everything,
yeah, I would definitely, the first thing that popped into my head was a similar thing, that I am irrationally attached to the overhead projector that is in use in my classroom. Yes. I make transparencies on the copy machine.
You're not still with chalk.
Yes, yeah. Well, yeah, and we have whiteboard markers too. One of which I found in my pockets this afternoon. Yeah, it's pretty fancy. Yeah. But yeah, the idea that if we change the medium of what we're doing, then that is somehow going to transform the way in which we know things. And I agree that my kids who are digital natives do come at things from a different way than I do, but I don't think that changes everything about how we
do. Okay. This has been an educational change sauna, again from Harvard Graduate School of Education. We have had a pleasure to have Blair and Jonathan as students here, and my good friend Andy Hargreaves. And as a closure to this conversation, we have had a real sauna with Andy several times. But if you want to read more about the fallacies, about the kind of a bright mind of Andy, please read his most recent book, The Professional Capital, award-winning book, and a wonderful story about many of these things that we read are true but are not. Thank you, Andy, very much for coming.
Yeah.